If we're ready to start here, if everybody's got a orange sheet, quite a few years ago in California, the Acres USA company was having a healthy soil summit, and they asked us if we had a customer in the area to do a field tour, and asked if I'd talk about healthy soil. And there's a lot of talk, like what we talked about this morning. There's a lot of people that talk about healthy soil, balancing healthy soil, or getting healthy soil, but they don't tell you what that means. So, like this morning, we talked about healthy soil, healthy plant is without disease and without impairment. So when we look at these numbers, if these numbers are new, if you've never seen them before, these are also quite new, because the first time I saw it in print from a university professor in a book that was published was in 1853. So if you haven't seen this, it's almost like they don't want us to know. So with that, looking at composition of healthy soil, if we start on the very top of that, there's 5% with a blank. and we left the blanks there because a lot of times you go to a conference and you get some smart jack up on the stage giving numbers and giving this, and an hour after you leave you go, what did he say about this, or what were these numbers? Or I want to give you written proof, so if you're working for a company that is telling you something that may not quite sound 100% in your favor, you have ammunition to combat him. And when you ask him questions and show him these numbers, please ask him or her, whoever it may be, if they agree. And if they agree that these numbers are right, your next question is, why haven't you told me these before? So if they're not being honest, if they're not being a true person, are they your best guide? So something that a lot of companies are talking about is soil organic matter, which makes up 5% of your soil, if you'd like to write that in. They say 5% is utopia. I will honestly be able to tell you it's not. And what I mean by that is, on our research farm, we average 4.7, 4.8, 4.9% soil organic matter, 0.2 from perfection. It's like, oh golly. Our farm manager, Trent, approached me several years ago and says, you always talk about how horrible manure is. He goes, I've never seen it. And I'm like, oh. I said, well, we're going to do it for 2 years, raw dairy manure. He goes, well, I'll mark it out. I said, you won't have to, because we'll see it. Over those 2 years of raw dairy manure application, our soil organic matter did not change. It stayed at 4.8%. But the weeds outgrew the corn. The weeds outgrew the beans. Our yield dropped by 70+%, but our soil organic matter didn't change. Which kind of led me to believe it's like that may not be as important a number as what they want us to believe. So I started looking further, and I found out that our carbon to nitrogen ratio changed. But that's a little further down the list. So 5% organic matter. Going down on your right-hand side, 45% of your soil. Anybody got an idea what that should be? You know what? Hang on. I like doing this. The answer I was looking for was soil minerals. But then you raise your hand, 45% of your soil should be soil minerals. If you get your soil test right, you're going to get a 45% on your grade. The minerals in your soil aren't necessarily available to the plant unless you have microbes, unless you have air, unless you have electricity, and unless you have photosynthesis. So if you get your soil test minerals perfect, you get a 45% grade. So we're at 50%. And a lot of companies want us to believe that soil minerals and organic matter should be everything, but it's only half. And the other half is equally divided, 25%, between air and water. If you want to write that down, you got to have air in the soil to have a vacancy in order to have water penetrate. And these are the numbers that the universities have gone with for 170 years. Is that the whole picture? For the few of us that are old enough to remember Paul Harvey, I'm now going to tell the rest of the story. When we look at these numbers, we think, okay, well, 45%, we can go to a soil lab, we can get numbers, that's a good thing. 5% of the soil organic matter, that's going to be on our soil test. How do we evaluate if our soil has 25% air? When you look at the meteorology map and you listen to the weatherman, they will talk about barometric pressure, sometimes in millibars. The pressure, the heavy sinking air. And if you look at the pressure of the soil, when you look at soil physiologists, they'll talk about centibars. Well, who gives two craps about centibars or millibars? Let's understand something that makes sense. PSI, pounds per square inch. 100 to 150 PSI is where the air moves in and out. Natural respiration. And the deeper that air can go in, and the more microbes you have within that profile, the more good things that will happen within that profile. If you have a soil that has a high pH, and when I say high pH, anything over 7, I had a conference call from Michigan here last week, and there were 3 big farmers on the call. And they said, we farm a large amount of Michigan. And he says, we're not really happy with our agronomist. He goes, we don't have much time. Can you tell us something in 3 minutes that will get our attention? I said, do you have any soil that has a pH higher and lower than 7? He said, absolutely. I said, do you have your maps, your GPS maps, stacked so that you can check everything from the soil test to the planting to the starter to the foliar to the yield? He goes, absolutely. I said, tell me what your yield difference is between a 6.8 or a 6.9 and anything over a 7. And I hear some keyboard clicking on the computer. And I hear the one guy say, no way. Next guy says, that's bullshit. Third guy says, do you hire agronomists? Because there's going to be one looking for work. What's my point? There's a breaking point at 7. Many of the agronomists, many of the companies that sell us goods don't necessarily have the level of intent to have an efficiency of the products that are used. everything that's good works better in the mid-6s, 6.4, 6.5, 6.6. Once you get over 7, please look, after you see your soil pH, please look at the hydrogen portion of your base saturation. You should have 10 to 15% base saturation of hydrogen. If you don't, you have too high a pH. pH not standing for potential hair, but standing for potential hydrogen. Nobody talks about hydrogen, but it's kind of important. Anybody, can you help me out? I'm not a chemist. The plant is supposed to make sugar, photosynthesis, sunlight, water, mineral, sugar. Anybody know what 3 ingredients it takes to make sugar? Oh, I don't have enough money for that one. 6 parts carbon. If you want to write this down, if you're not, didn't enjoy chemistry like I didn't enjoy chemistry, but sugar, the result of photosynthesis is C6, H12, O6. Now, if you were a plant and your pH that you had your roots in was a 7.2, you'd be doing the, I've got a little carbon, got a little oxygen. I can't make sugar. I don't have any hydrogen. Nobody's talked about hydrogen. It's one of the lightest, squirreliest elements in the periodic table. Nobody talks about hydrogen. It's a key component and makes up a larger percent of your plant than nitrogen. Oh, there's a stinger. So, my old professor years and years ago, he said, when you're listening to these talks with the professors or the companies, listen to what they don't say. And being a simple guy, it's like, well, if they don't say it, how do I know if they were supposed to say it? He says many times it isn't what they say, but what they're talking about could be a direction to point you away from the truth. So when I asked that PhD of geneticist with a major seed company, why does corn dent? Said, well, it's a natural maturing process of the plant. It's like, well, what we found out is the nutrition wasn't there. Or the soil of the pH was over 7, there wasn't any hydrogen to make up ammoniacal or ammoniated nitrogen that drives the cob fill, that drives the pod fill, that increases the test weight to give you financial success. And many times, your biggest limiting factor, my biggest limiting factor on my farm, and your neighbor's biggest limiting factor may not be what they've been telling you. So right below the soil, they talk about soil penetrometer, 100 to 150 psi is where everything works the best. To give you a different set of numbers, when you're pushing down with this, 100 to 150 psi is where all the party happens. When you hit 200 psi is where microbes say, it's too much pressure. We're not working. We have our union card, 200 psi, we're not doing anything. But something that happens is a feeder root can still push through up to 300 psi. But there's a problem. That feeder root wants to be colonized, protected, and joined with a pile of soil aerobic microbes. If those microbes aren't there, feeding the root, receiving nutrition from the root, protecting the root, that root is hanging out in the wind. And now it's susceptible to any pathogen that may come along. So the pressure of the soil being between 100 and 150 is much more important than what many companies want you to believe, because when you get that pressure right and that air can move in and move out and that soil can breathe and the microbes are doing their job, your inputs will go down. With that, we're going to jump over to composition of a healthy plant. And we're going to start with the smallest increment, and there's two of them that are at 3%. And one of those 3% is what most farmers spend most of their input money on. Anybody got a guess what that may be? Nitrogen! Yes, you guys are all right. 3% of a healthy plant wants to be nitrogen. When you have more than 3%, you have disease, you have crop failure, you have insect infestation, you have problems that cost you money. 3% of the plant wants to be nitrogen. The next 3%, and please, if you would, do me a favor and just think about this. The next 3% is all the soil minerals that you got on your soil test that only make up 45% of the soil. So all the importance, these companies say, well, do your soil test, do a grid, do a 2-acre grid, do a 5-acre grid, do this, do that. It's like, baloney. Check the worst, check the best, because a soil test only tells you 45% of what's in the soil, and it only makes up 3% of a healthy plant. This is on a dry matter basis, no water involved. Well, it's good numbers to know, but let's put things into perspective. So we've got 3% nitrogen, we've got 3% soil minerals. The 4% moving up the scale is hydrogen. Has anybody ever heard any speaker talk about hydrogen at an ag conference? If you are, you'll be the first. Nobody gives a crap about hydrogen. Well, hydrogen's important, air's important, electricity is important, sugar is important, and they can all be related to romance. They're all important, or they're not important unless you're not getting one of them. Everything handles full circle. Nobody thinks about air or heartbeat until it's gone. So 4% of the plant is hydrogen. If your pH is over 7, you have 0 hydrogen on the clay particle. How do we get our pH down? A lot of the experts would say sulfur, sulfate, sulfuric acid, sulfur, sulfur, sulfur. It's like, okay. If you put a sulfur down, the sulfur is going to grab onto a few oxygen, 4 to be exact, and become a sulfate. When a sulfate, SO4, gets mixed with water, it produces something really fantastic that's in your car battery or your pickup battery called sulfuric acid. When that sulfuric acid is created, has anybody been burned or had a little battery acid on your pants or maybe in your face? Do you think microbes are going to like getting blasted in the face with sulfuric acid? Lowering the pH of your soil is very simple. It can be very inexpensive. Little turn of events. Does anybody have irrigation that has high bicarb water? You've seen the chemical formula HCO3. It's a problem. pH of 7, 8, 8, 8.5, 9, and it's driving the pH of the soil up, and the experts will say, nothing you can do. Baloney. Here's Mother Nature. When you get the air in the soil and you get your carbon in the soil, that we're going to talk about those numbers in just a little bit, those microbes start a party. And they're huffing and they're puffing and they're breeding and they're doing everything that they need to do, and they're working for you, and they're giving off CO2. When CO2 and H2O combine, CO2 and water, that makes carbonic acid. And that will lower the pH of your soil, even if you're throwing out high bicarb water. Carbonic acid is a natural, Mother Nature created acid that comes from CO2 and H2O. It's going to take a little time, but adding carbon to the soil, making sure the soil can breathe, your pH will come down. And when your pH comes down under 7 to a 6.9, you're going to have a, oh, this is what the bald guy from South Dakota was talking about. This is nice. This works. I like this. Your inputs become more available. In the soil, everything works better in a pH of between 6 and 7. To be more exact, what we have seen, 6.4, 6.5. If we're healthy, and this is a little diversion, and we take a pee on a pH strip right away in the morning, if we're healthy and our body's in sync and the minerals are in balance, guess what the pH of our urine should be? Yeah, 6.4, 6.5, exactly. It's almost like there was a plan. It's almost like there was a creator that had an idea. It's like, I think this may work. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Everything starts with the earth and begins with the earth. As we're looking at these numbers, this all comes full circle. These are the numbers that will get your input bills lower. You will have less trouble, less stress, less disease, less insects, less weeds. So 3% of a dry matter weight of a plant is nitrogen, 3% is soil minerals, 4% is hydrogen. What do we have, a couple left? Anybody got an idea what the big two are? 47%. Anybody take a guess what that could be? Yes, carbon! How did you know? You guys are a great group. Carbon should make up 47% of the dry matter weight of any plant that you grow. If it isn't there, you will have trouble. Carbon has to have a partner. Carbon has to go along with oxygen, which makes up 43% of the plant. A little caveman chemistry here, and we do a lot of work on the West Coast. And on the West Coast, there's a lot of very high magnesium, high pH, very tough, brick hard soil. And we went with some equipment that nobody else looks at, nobody ever thinks about, because I was talking to some professors at UC Davis, and I said, what happens when the soil just gets a light crust over the top? Could be just a thickness of a piece of paper. And you can't get air in, you can't get CO2 out. And I get a real quiet response from the professors and nothing. I said, tell me if I'm looking at this right, but every element, almost every element, has to have oxygen to go from the soil to the plant. If someone were to shut the air off in this room, there'd be a lot of creativity. Some people may be going to the corner to see if there's more air there. Somebody would say, now CO2 is heavier than air. That's not where you want to be. You want to be up in the peaks. Somebody may be choking somebody else out so they don't take so much air. There's going to be a fight. In the soil, after a rain or after an irrigation, if you just get a very thin paper crust, it stops that air pressure, that air movement. And all of a sudden, the microbes that are giving off CO2 don't have enough new air to take the carbon and oxygen out of. And so if you take away one oxygen molecule and send it with phosphorus or magnesium or potassium, what happens when carbon dioxide loses one oxygen molecule? Carbon monoxide. We actually got a machine that would test it. And these guys in California are like, what is wrong with you? It's like, well, no, we don't want to know. But why would you test this? I say, because nobody has. There's a lot of this stuff. These people are complaining, it's like, yeah, our trees don't look very good. Well, they're getting a dose of carbon monoxide on a daily basis. The common sense things can even get worse. CO2 is the minimum. Carbon dioxide is the minimum a plant wants. So if you lose one oxygen molecule, it goes to carbon monoxide. Let's go one step further. If you have carbon in an oxygen-less environment, no oxygen, it's an anaerobic environment, and you throw nitrogen, you now have the ability to form cyanide. And we've tested that as well. Many of these things that we've looked because we didn't know, and there's way more stuff that we don't know than we ever will, but we've done these testing to figure out, holy crap, there's a lot of stuff here that they're not telling us. With that, when you look at what a healthy plant is made of, does anybody have an idea what your biggest limiting factor may be? It may possibly be something you haven't tested before. It may be something that nobody's ever talked to you about before. Moving down, the most important mineral content of a healthy plant. This is for perennial crops. If you have pasture, if you have a grass meadow, if you have alfalfa, or if you grow apple trees or peach or plum or pear or pistachio or walnut or olive, whatever it may be, you want a minimum of 2% calcium in that plant, because 2% calcium on a perennial plant is the minimum calcium content that plant can have to start photosynthesizing, making sugar at a respectable, reliable, predictable, sustainable level. 2% calcium minimum. Good alfalfa, good grass hay should be 0.3% phosphorus. In my simple mind, I look at calcium being the mother, phosphorus being the father, and those two have to be in charge. So many times they say, well, your pH is too high. You need to throw sulfur out. Throw a ton or 2 tons of sulfur. Well, if you look at the minerals in order, calcium's the largest volume, then it goes phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur's 5th. So it's like taking the youngest kid, the smallest kid in the family, and say, well, you're now in charge. Granted, you're only 3, but what should we do for our family vacation? Problem awaits. So everything needs to be in perspective. And along with that, if you're growing alfalfa, or if you're growing grass hay for your livestock, your feed man may say, don't worry about the relative feed value. Don't worry about the relative feed quality. Just get good protein. That's all you need. I had to write this down because I normally don't pay attention to this. Crude protein is a derivative of nitrogen. Nitrogen will grow a plant, it won't grow a healthy plant. Nitrogen will grow and finish an animal, but it won't be a healthy animal. What do I mean by that? The difference in people between healthy or unhealthy let's just say you didn't feel good, you went to the doctor. Says, doc, I'm not feeling very good. He says, well, doc says, let's pull a blood sample. We'll run a blood panel. Have an answer for you in a couple days. So you pull the blood, come back in 2 days. And he says, well, got good news and bad news. Bad news is you got the flu. Good news is you have an elevated white blood cell count, and that means your immune system is working. If you're a doctor, you get paid to say stuff like that. In the animal world, the somatic cell count is the white blood cell count on dairy cattle. Before all the chemicals, before all the GMOs, back in the 1900s, a healthy somatic cell count was 25,000 to 30,000. Any dairyman now, if you're under 100,000 now, they'll shake your hand and call you sir. What's going on? The white blood cells in our body and the body of an animal, no matter what kind of a critter it is, the white blood cells respond to disease that the red blood cells did not have the power, the energy, or the capability of stopping it before it entered the body. There's all kinds of diseases in the air. Haemophilus pleuropneumonia in livestock, which they now call actinobacillus. You can look at Pasteurella hemolytica or Pasteurella multasa, whether it be cattle or hogs. These are airborne diseases, and they're here right now. Why aren't we sick? Because we have carbon and oxygen in our red blood cells that fuel the immune system, so the white blood cells don't have to fight it off. There's a similarity. Increase the carbon and oxygen in your plant, in your soil, decrease your nitrogen bill, decrease your chemical bill, decrease your inputs, have a lower break even, and all of a sudden stress can go to one of your neighbors that's doing the same old, same old, same old. So this morning we talked about carbon to nitrogen ratios. If you haven't done a carbon to nitrogen ratio on your soil, please do. It will save and make you money, and you'll get to understand a whole new world. A lot of guys say, well, what do we test? I said, keep it simple, keep it cheap. Test the worst, test the best. You'll see what makes up the worst, and you'll see what makes up the best. You don't necessarily need 1 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre grids. Go to the two extremes and you'll start writing your own book to success. The carbon and nitrogen, number one under the carbon and nitrogen ratios, the common carbon to nitrogen ratio in most soils is an 8-to-1. Quite a few years ago, we hired a set of microbiologists, contracted them actually, to figure out what do microbes need, what do they want. And we spent 1.5 years paying 3 guys a horrible amount of money, only to learn that these numbers, and after we paid all these guys, the NRCS laid out the same numbers that we had found. It was wonderful that they matched. And it was a confirmation for them and for us that the numbers were very accurate. The agronomy world, just like this morning, they'll say, oh, golly, you got 8 times more carbon than nitrogen. The microbes just exist. They're like your crazy Uncle Harry that really isn't of much value, but he's always there. Number 2 on the carbon and nitrogen, you got to be a minimum of 16-to-1 to get those microbes partying. How do you do that? A lot of places in Montana, Idaho, Utah, Washington, California, and Oregon have an obnoxious amount of magnesium. And that magnesium, like we talked about this morning, is hanging on to nitrogen, tying it up, making it unavailable. When you can put a little of the correct calcium on that high mag soil, to give you an idea, if mineral names were given to people, my brother would have been named Magnesium because he was the problem child and he had to sit between mom and dad in church because he just couldn't keep it together. When calcium comes in and magnesium's being a grubby, greedy electrolyte mineral, mom politely grabs magnesium and just like this morning, like, let go of that nitrogen and sit there and be good. You know the type when the mothers don't move their jaw and their lips barely move, it's like, oh, she's pissed. We have similar mothers. When the magnesium lets go of the nitrogen, your carbon to nitrogen ratio increases, not by adding carbon, but by getting rid of some of the nitrogen that wasn't available before. I'll give you an example. So many farmers that we look at, when we start talking with them, they go, oh, 8-to-1 carbon and nitrogen, and you're saying 16-to-1? It's like, I don't know if we can do it. Get a little bit of the right calcium, relax that magnesium, the nitrogen goes to the plant, and all of a sudden what was an 8-to-1 is many times now a 10, a 12, or a 13. People will ask, what's your favorite soil to work with? I said, high magnesium clay. The harder and nastier it is, the more wonderful. And they're like, oh, you are from South Dakota. What is wrong with you? It's like it's a treasure chest of nutrients. You start looking at that soil, all you gotta do is unlock it. There's a lot of dollars that's been stored in that soil. So when you get to 16-to-1, now the microbes are starting to work in the morning, and they'll keep working in the afternoon. The night shift will come on, and then the weekend shift, it's 24/7. All they want is a breath of fresh air, a little bit of carbon, and some nutrients. Got to have calcium, got to have phosphorus, got to have all the minerals, but they will work day and night, holidays, weekends, to balance your soil. And the happier you keep those microbes, the quicker your soil will become balanced, will become healthy, because it's their house. Give them an opportunity, they're going to create a good environment because they live there. Their life depends on it. This isn't just a financial thing, this is life or death. People that may be selling a bunch of microbial packs. A lot of these microbial packs are fantastic. They're full of good bugs. They do everything that the company may say. But if you throw them into a horrible environment, they're not going to do anything for you. What do I mean by a horrible environment? pH over 7, pH under 6, carbon to nitrogen under 16-to-1, EC, electrical conductivity, over 1.0. If you've thrown microbes out and you didn't see a financial response, it's not necessarily the fault of the salesperson or the company. Many times by opening up the soil, getting the compaction relaxed, increasing the carbon, all of a sudden that microbe pack will work. From what I've seen on our research farm, there is nobody on this planet that I believe has put out more microbes than we have over the last 20 years. We would put out squillions of microbes on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And all we saw was my checkbook getting thinner. And at some point in time, it's never fun to start with, but nobody wants to spend money on something that doesn't work. With the microbes, make sure you have a good environment. Now, a lot of people will say, and they'll say, don't till your soil. Don't till your soil because you will rip and tear and destroy all the mycorrhizal fungi out of that soil. They're right. But Number 3 on the carbon and nitrogen, if you don't have an 18-to-1 carbon and nitrogen, you don't have any activity of mycorrhizal fungi in that soil. They live off the root exudates, and if your plant isn't 12 bricks, if the carbon and nitrogen isn't 18-to-1, you don't have any viable, productive mycorrhizal fungi working for you. A lot of advertisement, a lot of talk, a lot of things to spend money on. So, don't expect to see mycorrhizal fungi on a continual, reliable, predictable basis until you're 18-to-1 carbon to nitrogen. And the last one, balanced aerobic compost, 30 or 33-to-1. A lot of people want to put compost, they want to compost their manure, they want to compost this, they want to compost that. Your soil is a composter if you can relax the tension of the soil, check your carbon and put some carbon into the soil in the form of sugar. Now this is going to sound crazy, but let's just think about this. Photosynthesis is what the 8th grade science students taught years and years ago. And I thought it was so cool when the teacher said, you know, we breathe in air and we give off CO2. The plants take in CO2 and give off oxygen. I remember the teacher, I remember a lot of weird stuff, but I remember the teacher, he's like, what a cool thing. Mother Nature's helping us, we're helping Mother Nature. Well, all this carbon sequestration and the CO2, the people are saying, oh my gosh, there's over 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, we're going to die! It's been there before. We can fix it. How? Not by cutting fossil fuels, that may help. Not by keeping cows from burping or farting. But for every acre of land that you farm, most growers, their crop is anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 the sugar content it genetically should be. Is there any upward mobility for profitability on your farm, doing many things the same, but looking at it in a different way? Absolutely. Farming's fun when you're making money. Farming's fun when you don't have a pile of shithouse problems that you have to deal with. Problem's fun. Farming is fun when you can make a profit. What we found in the soil, these numbers aren't just numbers we've read or heard. They're numbers we put to use on our farm. They're numbers we put to use on the growers. These are numbers that the big corporate companies that you see in advertisement in the grocery store and on TV won't talk about us because we're the quiet company that helped them achieve the next level. A lot of our growers grow for what they call the white linen market. And the white linen market is a market I normally don't participate in because they're usually fairly expensive dinners, $300 to $500 to $1,000 a plate. Most of our strawberries in California and the blueberries in Washington go to the high-dollar restaurants. There are markets out there for quality grain. What we have found, moving to the bottom of the sheet, we found 5 things, but I'm only going to focus on the 4 to healing soil. And what we found to be the quickest, easiest, cheapest, most healthy way is number 1, we got to have mom in the house. Calcium has to be in the soil. And it has to be in the top inch has to be in the second, third, fourth, fifth. Mom has to be everywhere. If you had an older brother or a younger brother and you knew mom was down in the basement, you got a couple shots in on him before mom got up there, or he or she maybe got a couple shots on you before mom got up there, but once mom got up there, the referee was in the house. Check to see where your calcium is at. If you've been no-till, you may not have the calcium in the top portion of the soil. We do a lot of work in a lot of different states, and you probably heard about Palmer amaranth possibly being a horrible problem, even in Missouri. They say it's a superweed. Okay, it's a superweed, it's a horrible weed. We need stronger chemistry. And well, these superweeds and these chemical resistant weeds are growing in super screwed up soil. Low calcium. Number 2 on this sheet, low phosphorus. Not necessarily on the soil test, but your phosphorus has to be hooked to a pile of oxygen to get to the plant. You've got plenty of phosphorus in most soils. You got way more than what your soil test probably shows. Get some air and some microbes in there, and you won't have to buy as much phosphorus. We have seen soil tests from Midwest Labs in Moxie, Washington, just outside of Yakima, with a little bit of the right calcium and sugar. We have seen phosphorus levels quadruple 4 times in 6 weeks. They went from single digits up into double digits, not adding any phosphorus. A little bit of the correct calcium and sugar. This thing doesn't have to be as expensive as what the big companies are counting on. So, number 1 and number 2, calcium and phosphorus, they're the regulators. They're the minerals that we need for our physical structure. We need it for our bones, for our teeth, for our heartbeat, and the microbes are no different. They have to have it for their physical integrity. If there isn't calcium in the top portion of the soil, you buy some really nice bugs that you got a fantastic sales pitch and it doesn't work, please don't blame the salesman or the company right away because you threw them in a horrible environment. Just being honest. So 1 and 2 are calcium and phosphorus. Those are the 2 most important minerals needed to start photosynthesis. The plant making sugar. And if you haven't checked what your plant making sugar is, please do, because that is the only way you're going to get out of chemicals, out of nitrogen, and lower your input cost. So number 1 is calcium, number 2 is phosphorus, number 3 is carbon. Please check your carbon to nitrogen ratio in your soil, because the microbes have to have some carbon to chew on if they're going to digest it and give off carbon dioxide. Just like we have to have carbon in our system if we're going to give off carbon dioxide. Number 4, oxygen. Every good thing has to breathe. Many of these things you can test yourself. The oxygen in the soil comes at that 100 to 150 psi. When you structure the soil, it can breathe. Now, if we come across somebody laying on the floor, they're all purple and not moving, it's like, oh, wow. Wonder if he's hungry. Yeah. And if he could talk, he'd say, no, you dumb, I can't breathe. I'm suffocating. Well, you want a cheeseburger? Like, no. Look for the biggest deficiency in your operation field to field. Look to see what's missing and what will make you the most money by replacing. In most cases, it comes with the top 4 things on the bottom of that sheet. Calcium, phosphorus, carbon, and oxygen is the best return on investment in most fields, in most areas, no matter what your type of growing is. And then number 5, after you've got your calcium and phosphorus at respectable levels, your carbon and oxygen is in the zone. Now if you want to put down some beneficial aerobic microbes or mycorrhizal fungi, you'll actually give them a fighting chance. Don't evaluate the company unless you give their product a fair shot.